Am I recording now? Hello, hello. Okay. Hi, my name is Oscar Ramirez. I am in Bonnie's 1302 English class, and I'm going to be answering my final questions today. And the first question I'm going to be starting with is the research process. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is what I knew before. What I knew before really was when you look for research papers and articles, you would just simply go on Google and type whatever you were looking for, and then you would hit submit, and the first thing that would pop out, you would start using it, and you would apply to your research. That was the first thing I knew, and the first thing I knew also, the second thing I knew as well is you can trust Wikipedia for your research. And I never really bothered to ask any questions about it, if the research was good, if it was peer reviewed, if anything like that. I didn't really know about any of that, but after I took this class, what I started to learn was there's ways to figure out if the research that you have is actually good. And one of the ways that we used was a crap sheet. And here's one of them for the articles that we did. And the crap sheet has multiple questions to see if the information you're using is good. When was the information published or posted? What has the information been revised or updated? Does your topic require current information, or will older sources work as well? Are the links to the sources functional? Other notable second sources current? And the list goes on and on. And that was very important for me. This crap sheet helped me a lot to know if the research was recent, if it was peer reviewed, meaning that people were going through it and it wasn't just some fake information, if the people that created the work were contactable, you could contact them. Fourth of all is that even the research had to apply towards your work as well. I mean, sometimes I would just go on, click whatever, and halfway through that article, it was completely talking about something else. So this made me clear up a lot of the things. The next thing that really helped me also was the critique research. This one helped me set out what were the purposes, the situations. I mean, the purposes, the situation, the major claims, and the supporting evidence. It made me figure out what was the article talking about in such a faster way. It helped me not waste so much time before I would go through the article reading it word by word. Now this makes me have a goal to what I'm looking for in order to see if the research is actually good. And so that was very important for me. The next thing is also using the UTRGV library when we would want to search up an article or wanted to look up for something that needed some peer reviewed. It had to be from a good source, a good website. I would love to. I was taught to use the UTRGV library, which has very good sources, good websites for peer reviewed work, and up to date work as well for the articles. And the way I'm really going to apply this type of learning that I got from the class, the research process, is that I'm an English major, so I have to prepare myself to doing research papers. I mean, I have to do papers for, I'm sorry about that. I have to do papers for other classes and other work. Uh, I have to know where to get my sources from when I have to do a term paper, when I have to do a final paper, and I have to know how to do so. And using the critique research paper and the crap worksheet, figuring out the sources, figuring out what is this article really talking about is going to really help me and add a lot of credibility to my work in the future as a student. And the next question that I want to focus on is integrating secondary sources into my writing. And that's something that was very rough for me at the very beginning because I thought it was very simple in order to put secondary sources. It was just an A, B, C, almost an alphabetical order. It really wasn't something that had to be drawn in smoothly. I thought secondary sources were just thrown in there. But one thing that I also believed when it comes to my secondary sources was that, I'm sorry, I have to take a pause. Another thing that I thought was that our secondary sources were the main research. It was what we were going to be using for all of our argumentation, and that's really not what was going on necessarily. Really what happens with secondary sources that I've learned is that the sources are just used to support your main source, which is the information that you're going out in your research. And the secondary sources are not something that are supposed to be placed as the high pedestal, as the main information, but as it says, a secondary source. It's not supposed to be number one, head honcho. And another thing is also that I also learned was to integrate in a very smooth way of my information, and I'm going to show you that way that you can integrate it. Here I have my introduction, and right after that I go into the question that I ask. So then after that I go into what are my secondary sources. I'm not the only one who holds such an idea that a cell phone can be used to advance ourselves in a classroom in our learning. And I go into my secondary source right away, rather than saying, and here are a list of secondary sources that will support my idea as well. Rather than doing that, I do it in a very smooth way, going lightly into the subject rather than just diving into something without really doing very well. And another thing that I learned was the gaps. It was very important to figure out the gaps that you have for your secondary sources. While doing research does seem to tackle the idea how do people do not use their cell phones on their work, how it actually helps us is to learn and advance doing our assignments. And then from there I went into my gaps. So right after talking about my secondary sources, I went straight into the gaps. What was wrong with them? What didn't they do that I had to do that was specific to my need for my research, which adds a lot of value to what you're going to talk about. Rather than getting support from someone else, you have hard evidence that you've collected yourself, which adds a lot of value to your article. And then another thing I learned about secondary sources is citing them. How to cite them, really. I didn't know you need a separate page for them, and I didn't know that it was in this format, but this is how you cite your secondary sources, and I found that to be very interesting. I didn't really know how to cite, and in this class we were taught how to cite in MLA format. Now, how would I apply this in my future? Well, again, I am an English major, so when doing anything that has to do with research, anything that has to do with a term paper of a certain subject or question, you have to gain secondary sources before you do your own types of interpretations or analyze any type of work. You have to have some type of support in order for the professor to say, well, this doesn't sound like a bunch of mumbo jumbo, it's actually real work. And so that's one of the things that I'm going to be using when it comes to applying into my future, is that when I'm doing research and I have to integrate my secondary sources, I'm not going to do it in an unsmooth way. That's the first thing. I'm not going to do it in a main supporting way, like these are my core ideas. I'm not just going to be someone who bandwagons off of something. I'm going to make sure I have to put in my gap when I talk about the research. I have to show that there's something wrong with this research that's not suiting the question that I have or the problem or dilemma. And then also the last thing is I have to cite my research in order for the professor to know that it's not mine. It's actually give credibility to someone, so I won't be kicked out of the university and I can actually get my credit. So then the last question that I'm going to be answering is the feedback process, which is something that was very special for me. Reason being that I wasn't very good at asking for feedback, and I'm not very good at giving feedback. But through this process, it helped me a lot. And so what I knew about feedback really was that someone would hand you the paper and you would just read it through almost the entire thing and then just possibly, hopefully find something and just critique them on it. But other than that, that was all I knew. And when I was asking for research, I would just hand my paper to someone and just say, could you please read my research and tell me if it's any good? So those were my basic ideas of what feedback process were. I didn't know that you had to analyze the work. I didn't know you had to really read the question. I didn't know you had to ask a specific question to what your needs are. I really didn't know that. And so what I learned is that you have to give what you want and you have to ask for what you want as well. So I'm going to give you an example of what you're not supposed to do when you ask for research. what would you change from this intro? Professor Bonnie, you did get after me, and I'm very sorry for asking such a lazy question, but that is something that you're not supposed to do. So what I learned is not to ask simple questions like that. So what I learned as well is to ask very specific questions like this one. Bonnie, should I place a visual information to explain the example, a graph, a column, or a picture? And right here, as you can see, is that the form of the way my research was going wasn't very presentable, and instantly Bonnie gave me a yes and then started telling me what I had to do in order to fix my research. Now I want to look at someone else's my feedback to other people's questions, but just for the basic privacy, I won't go into their work. But the way I can say is how I would have done it is first I would have analyzed the question they have, and see what specific needs they have. Then I would analyze the text that they have before me. I would see what's wrong with them. I would write down a few things. I would say, what would I do different? What would it suit the need? I would read the paragraph before that paragraph, and the paragraph after that paragraph that they're asking me to analyze in order to see the context of the story. After that, I would begin to answer the question, doing multiple ones, not just a single one. That way I can offer them a certain amount of options to their specific need. And that's really what I learned on how it comes to giving research critique, feedback to other people's research. Now, the way I would apply it in the future, well, I would ask for specific research, specific questions to my research and critique. Since I am an English major, again, I'll just state that I'm an English major, I have to be able to ask specific questions to what are my needs when it comes to my writing. If it be an introduction, if it be a title, if it be anything. Before I used to think you could not ask, it was all about the research. You can only critique research. It can critique title, it can critique structure, grammar structure, indentions, citing. You have to be very specific in what you want in order to be critiqued properly and get the information that you need in order to succeed in your classes. And the next thing I have also learned is that when you go and give critique is that you have to be very analytical. You can't expect to give someone an answer that they're not asking for. You have to give them what they really asked for. And so when I'm going to give research to someone, I'm going to ask them personally, hey, can you just tell me what is exactly what you really want me to critique? What is exactly what you're looking for? That way we can get to the bottom line of fixing their research, fixing their work in order to save time and just be more efficient. So those are the things that I've learned. I hope that this video is very informative of what I've learned in this classroom, and I thank you very much, Bonnie, for the 2 wonderful semesters.